before we start, just a quick question. Who of you guys noticed that sometimes you feel just sharp in the morning, so you wake up, you have the energy, and then later in the afternoon you just notice that you have some form of crash? Recognizable? So, everybody, all right? And who notices that when this happens, you actually get more distracted, like easily. So for example, you get your phone, start scrolling, potentially make worse decisions. Recognizable as well at the moment? Check. Of course, if you start talking about this, like a lot of people will talk about that this is due to like discipline or willpower, which to my perspective is like very important. Of course, otherwise we won't be here. Like Move, of course, is all about our discipline as well. However, to my perspective, this is not always the case. My name is Jorn Kirkels. I've helped over 400 entrepreneurs increase their health, increase their performance. And in those years, I've worked with names such as Thijs Verlangen, for example, Joshua Kaats. I've been on the Lotgenoten podcast, which in the Netherlands is a bigger podcast for entrepreneurs as well. And in those years, I actually found out it's not only about discipline and mindset. It's only just one part of the equation. And again, it's very important. But today we go actually much more in depth in like a separate section, which is most often overlooked. And of course, as Mickey already mentioned, this is definitely something that a lot of people do not take in account. But actually understanding this will have a huge impact on how you go throughout your day, which will help a lot with energy, focus, specific things like that. Because as I mentioned, like 9 out of 10 times, it's not biology of mindset, it's actually your biology. So your body, like the things that you do day to day. So let me explain a bit. And also a little bit of context, like in the background, why this is important specifically. If you're going to check the data, this is literally the data over the last 50 years of male testosterone, for example, and the sperm count are at record lows. Also, if you check for the market of female fertility, like testing for fertility, for example, those are actually at record highs. So meaning the fertility of females going down and also the testosterone of men as well. Also, if you check, and of course, this is something that you not only can see in the data, but also just if you walk outside, for example, on the airport, to my perspective, it's super extreme to see like the amount of unhealthy people, like the obesity and things like that. So we're just in an environment which everything is going up, cancer as well. So it's literally the environment. And what's even more important is that this is not our fault as the things. What is much more important is there are a couple of things that actually have an impact on our environment. So if you check the environment itself, most of them, if you go into the food environment, are managed by 8 big companies. And those companies are literally making a profit by making you addicted to the food. Also, if you go much more in depth outside of the food, so even if you're already aware, for example, of how diet has an impact on your energy levels, if you go much more in depth, what you can see is that the big companies such as like Silicon Valley, so Meta, for example, and other big companies, of course, they make money from your attention. So everything is made there. And then also with the big pharma, which again is great if you have something on your knee, for example, you broke your leg and things like that. It's great that there are doctors for that. However, if you go to where everybody just raise their hand for increasing your energy, they will just say it's not something that we can fix. And the reason for that is that the big pharma actually gets paid to medicine and not directly from prevention. So it's like a very great market and more of the environment itself. And because of this, in our society, the points that we just mentioned with, for example, the brain fog, the low energy and things like that are literally normalized. It feels normal. And that's actually for most people, they are not aware to it day to day. And they think, okay, this is just part of the game. It's just how I live my life. But from my perspective, and that's something that is actually my goal of this presentation for you guys, is it doesn't have to be this way. I do know you guys have that desire to actually get much more energy, get more out of your day, and just for a second, just take the frame that what you just mentioned, that things like that feel normal, but it doesn't have to be the case. And the best metaphor I can give for that is that just imagine that you are a fish, and the fish is born in a pond, like a pond of water, and of course the fish does not know that it's swimming in water. If you are born in that pond for like the first time, it's literally your reality. You do not like know that you are swimming in the water. My goal for you guys in this presentation is actually to get out of this water into the clear fishbowl, and then for the first time you can actually see like, oh, this is also how it can be. And of course, I'm limited this presentation because you cannot like feel things right now. But over the next week, like the next days, you actually start noticing things. And then if you go back to that pond, then you can actually feel like the main difference. So that's super important on the points that we want to focus on. Because I know, as I mentioned, all of us guys have the desire to get much more energy, focus, things like that. And that's the goal, to go much more in depth. All right? Little bit of background. Of course, I did mention This is what I do like all day long, like optimizing health, things like that. But it didn't start that way. It's a pretty old photo, but as you guys can imagine, like from a few years back, I was just following the crowd, doing everything to just be one of like the crowd. So smoking weed, like standard things like that. However, like internally, of course, you do notice that this is not the way how you should live. From my perspective, I did have a feeling of emptiness. It was a year or 5 ago. I was just following the crowd, trying to fit in on all aspects, until I actually came randomly through a motivational podcast. Sounds very cliche, but for me that was the first time actually that I realized that I was in control, that I could do things about optimizing myself. So I started flipping the switch, and of course it's something that you do over a longer period of time. So instead of smoking weed, I actually did go running, working out in the mornings and things like that. And because of that, I actually noticed for myself that by taking control of what you can do, there are like small minor changes that have a big impact on how you live your life. And all those things together have a huge impact on your biology. And what happened is, because of that, I started my fitness coaching business, just like very small. Of course, friends started asking as well small questions like, can you help me with the fitness and very specific things? And throughout the time, I actually became much more focused on the business side of it. So this is Sam Ovens. I bet a very small, some people know Sam Ovens, potentially have seen it. No, so very small percentage. This is in the consulting space, business space. But what I learned from Sam is what he taught in a very practical way is very simple actually, is that of course you have your life. Your life is made out of years. Those years are made of months. Those months are made of weeks. And those weeks, of course, are made out of days. So literally what you do every day, long-term becomes your life. So that's the importance of routines. And that's something that clicked for me instantly. So actually what I started to do when I saw that is I started focusing on the business-wise, on focusing on my routines as well. In a very short period of time, I grew my business from, at that time, like 10K per month to 100K per month. But actually I missed the system. So this was very great because you can imagine I just made this switch for myself, grew very fast on a personal level. However, I was literally neglecting my biology because at that time I only thought it was only the mindset and only the discipline that you can just work harder. So what I did at the time was I was drinking a lot of coffee, even modafinil. So for the people that know that, it's like a cup of coffee, but then 10 times in like a small capsule. So a lot of stimulation. So it was very on. And because of that, I noticed I was constantly switched on in a very heavy way. Until like one day I had a normal meeting with a client. I was just sitting in a meeting, no like special meeting, just a meeting with a client. And before I knew it, like my voice was just in my throat. I couldn't speak properly. And before I know it, I literally had my first panic attack. And at that time, I didn't know what it was. I even didn't know what the word anxiety meant even. So over the time, I noticed and I actually experienced that there is a biological limit. And there's also a limit from you can have the discipline, the mindset, and the things that you actually can do, but your biology is limited. So at that time, I actually learned, instead of working against my biology, what a lot of people quote unquote try to do. So let's say we work harder, we go to bed later and those specific things, is I started figuring out like how does my biology work and what are the practical things that you can do to actually like small things that doesn't require a lot of effort because we do not have the time, we do not have huge amounts. Like our goal is not to be healthy. Our goal is of course to perform and do things like that. But health can actually be a very practical vehicle to achieve that. So at that moment I actually did go in depth. I started optimizing my routines. I took like 1,000 of supplements. I followed like all the advice. And then the following problem arises because I did literally everything perfectly for myself. So I followed the routines, I followed the gurus, but I still didn't have the results that I was looking to achieve. And at that time, I started actually measuring my data because something that my business coach, of course, told me as well in relation to like the OKRs and the measuring the data and things like that. And I used that principle to get into my health. And that was the first time that I actually could see small things. So for example, do some guys that like have an hour ring or Whoop band? Of course, you see Anna with a Whoop band. Nice, a lot of people. So that was for me actually the first time that instead of like doing random things, random routines, random things that you can actually optimize, I actually found out like you can see that some things that do work, but other things don't. And that's unfortunately also the environment online that we live in as well. Because there's a lot, like if you want to have a best-selling nutrition book, it's literally choose something that's bad. So let's say plants, for example, find something in the plants that's bad, and then write the opposite book about it. So for example, the carnivore diet is all about that plants have lectins, that because of eating plants, it will be bad for the gut and things like that. And then you have the other side of the videos, which is that cancer, for example, or that red meat causes cancer. So it's literally the opposite side as well. So by using data, you can actually find out what are the things that do work. And based on that, you have like much better results literally with the same effort. And that's something that I would love to give you guys. And that's, of course, something that I've developed over the years working with a lot of clients as well to actually find out what are the things that do work to make sure everything is in check. I see Murky is in the testimony as well. Nice. So there's a little bit of background, but my goal is specifically with this group is to make it very practical. So the last thing that I want is just send a lot of information, because I do think that, of course, just everybody raise their hands. I think it's great to make it also more, a bit more interactive as well. Of course, I will provide you guys with a framework, which will work step by step. So the lower in the framework, the quote-unquote easier it is and the biggest impact it has. But also if you guys have any questions or specific things, definitely raise your hand and we can go much more in depth. And that's something that I will and you guys will definitely notice during the presentation. Some things will definitely pop in your mind. A lot of people, and that's interesting before we like flip it on its head, is that what, if I ask the question like, what comes to mind if you have to be healthy? What is the first thing in general that comes to mind? Sleep? Okay, check. Food? Okay. Movement? 100%. What you see a lot with, especially with starting people like, of course, you guys are already further in relation to health. But if you ask like most people in relation to health, it is indeed movement, which of course is huge. But what is interesting if you check is that most people become aware, oh, I need to go to the gym, for example, in relation to movement. I need to work out. That's what people in general think about. After they have done that, they get the awareness that, oh, I can work out. However, if I do not recover, then I do not have anything about my workout. So then they go much more deeper in like nutrition, food and things like that. Once they have that set in place, and Super Storage already said like sleep, then sleep comes. And most people don't even touch on like environment. But the interesting thing is what I noticed over the past 4 years with coaching all of those clients is actually the opposite that you want to start with. So you want to start with making sure the environment is in check. I will provide you guys with some practical quick wins that we can let you implement. Then go to sleep, then the nutrition, and then the gym. You will notice that your body recovers much faster. So if you go in depth in the environment, who can relate with like 4 hours screen time, something like that? Who knows that screen time? Is it something that you guys know? Okay, a few people. If you do not know, I will spare you guys the shock, because normally if you just check the settings, you can actually see like this is like average for most people. We can check it for a few seconds to see people checking it. Let's see who has the highest. Who has more than 5 hours? What is it? 8. Okay, check. How many? 3. Okay, 3. Nice. 5. Okay. Okay, check. The highest I heard was 8. So I think on average, like most of us guys will have about like 4 or 5-ish hours. Some of us have 3, some of us have 2. The most important part here is that there's actually a system going at place why this happens. And if you're not aware of the system, of course, the people of the management team, we already have talked about this a lot, so we will go over a little bit more quickly. But what this book exactly explains, because I had in the past exactly the same as well, which I mentioned with being reactive, being on all the time. If you do not understand this model, this is the exact model the big tech companies use to actually hijack your attention. And again, that's super important, like by understanding this model, we know and we can actually see why the revenue of Meta, for example, just skyrocketed. It's very important to know is that 79% of all their revenue is just advertising revenue. And it's literally based on thousands of behavioral PhDs just focused on how can we make everything as addictive as possible. And by understanding the following model, this helps you get much more control over the day, as we mentioned, with waking up, reactivity, potentially having the feeling at the end of the day that you just have been all busy, but you're just laying in bed and think, okay, what was actually what I have done today? This is because most of us unconsciously are just stuck in this model. And by understanding this, we can actually get out of it. So the first thing they use is something called a trigger. And a trigger can be internal or external. Meaning an internal trigger could be FOMO, for example. So standard example is, let's say I send Dirk a message to get Dirk to a dinner. A FOMO could be like, did Dirk already send or reply to my message? That could be like an internal trigger. External trigger is more like a notification or like a red dot on an icon. So literally all the things are made to make your attention, because those red dots, they could have placed like the dot in the middle of the app icon. They could use a blue color instead of red. So everything is just made to grab your attention. What happens after that trigger is you will have some form of action. So you will open the app, you will check, for example, let's say I got the idea, okay, did Dirk already reply? So I go to WhatsApp, I open the app. That's the action that you take. Other examples could be like scrolling the feed, pulling to refresh, things like that. After that, and that of course gets the dopamine free as the reward. So we can see, for example, that Dirk did send a message. So that is the reward. And after that, and that's the most important part for the loop to happen, is we make a new investment. So let's say Dirk did reply. Nice, I get the dopamine spike. I'll reply back to Dirk. And what happens then is that opens the loop to a new trigger. And you can see how this loops, like all the time. And this is one example from Dirk. But just imagine for yourself that how many times did you open the app, for example, you wanted to open your phone and you see another trigger. So you see the Slack icon, for example. And before you know it, you're just 30 minutes or like an hour away in watching memes, for example, or something in those lines. I think somebody here is guilty. So by understanding this model, we can actually see there is one thing that we can do to take more control. Because everything starts with a trigger. So if we can control that trigger, we are instantly much more in control and instantly much more proactive. And that's something very important that actually makes us different as animals. In nature, and simply said, there are two things. There's a stimulus and a response. So for example, with a bird, very simple, we clap, that's the stimulus. Response is the bird flies away. It doesn't think about it. What makes us unique as a human is that we have actually a gap between the stimulus and response, meaning we can actually decide what we will do. However, what the tech companies want us to be is that this gap, they want literally to eliminate. Because that is literally what they do with the hook model. Because the stimulus happens and you respond. The stimulus happens, you respond. So you become literally reactive. So the very first step that we want to take to become more proactive, and again, why is this important? If you are more proactive, you know much better your goals, you feel much more in control, and at the end of the day, you have actually much better autonomy over what did your time go to and actually what did you want to achieve. So the very first step is that we want to eliminate as much of those stimuli as possible. And so practical examples that works best is the very first step actually, and this is a PDF, because otherwise it is a little bit more static. But normally what you can do is that you have your phone. And of course on the phone, if you open the phone, normally you have all the apps, all the dots and things like that. The very first quick win that you can implement to actually eliminate the stimulus to become much more proactive is that you remove all the apps from the home screen. Seems like a super small thing. This is literally like, it takes 2 minutes, but this helps you become much more reactive. So that's definitely step one that will help there. This one normally is a video, because now it doesn't play. But the second thing that works a lot, and I can just show a bit of what is important here as well, is that this is your brain. And there is a research done from George Miller, which actually found out that we have about 6 to 8 spots in this brain. What this actually means is that our brain is made for having ideas. Because how many times have you noticed, for example, that you are in the shower and you think, okay, this is a great idea. This is definitely something that I will remember. And if you do not write it down, literally like 2 hours later, shit, I had like a huge idea in the shower, but I literally do not know anymore what it is. The reason for that mostly is that we have those spots. And if those spots are filled, that is the feeling of overwhelm. So also if you notice, by the end of the day, you just lay in bed and you have those racing thoughts, this is primarily the reason for that. And it's also a solution. Because what you can do with those spots is, because our brain is for having ideas, not for holding them, is that we can get the spots out of our brain in one system. And you call it like brain dumping. So something, for example, that we have done with Murky and just a lot of entrepreneurs, is something that you can do for yourself as well, is make sure that you have one system in which you can easily brain dump your thoughts. So for example, simple app for that is like to-do list, for example. So you get those thoughts out of your mind, and you will notice that you have much more mental clarity as well. And you can imagine like those two small things already, remove all the apps, have a system that you brain dump, it provide much more mental clarity. And the power of that is like having those spots occupied. It's much more difficult to have quote unquote the discipline, the willpower, and that's to loop it back why I mentioned like of course discipline and willpower is super important, but many people are not aware of those small things, so this will help. Another quick win is, and I think this one is still aesthetic. What is important is if you go to your chats on WhatsApp, for example, what you normally see is a never-ending loop of all the chats, where some chats you have to reply to, for example, some chats are finalized, so just like thumbs up. Actually, a quick hack that you can do right now, and you guys can get your phone, because it's very practical that you can implement. If you go to settings on WhatsApp, and if you are in settings and you go to chats, what you can see there is that you can archive all chats, and normally the button keep chats archived is on. You can set it out. What this will do is instead of having like the never, I will show you guys, it's a little bit small, but a quick example, is that normally you have like a never-ending chat, of course, where you do not know what is done and finalized. What this causes is this causes more of those spots, because if you open your WhatsApp, it's a never-ending loop, because you do not know if it's done or not. So it's an open loop, and the loop stays open. So to close that loop, what you actually can do is if you go to the settings, as we just did, chats, and then you archive our chats and keep chats archived, what happens then is that your inbox in WhatsApp actually gets an inbox. Meaning, what happens, if somebody sends a message, it will get into your inbox. Then if you open the inbox, you have a new open loop. Then you know, oh, I have to reply to that person. And if this chat is done, so it could be that you have replied or it's a thumbs up, you can simply archive it and you get to inbox 0. And the power of this is that you close your loop, because if you then open WhatsApp, or in general, like if you lay in bed, and you know that you have hit inbox 0, or some version of it, like you can snooze chats and things like that, then that loop is closed. And you can imagine like how much mental clarity this provides. And again, that mental clarity, that is the foundation for having much more discipline, focus, and being in control of the day as well. Okay? So step back, like quick wins, is make sure that you clean all the apps, so you do not have stimuli that are not something that you initially thought about. Second step is that you have some form of system that you can brain dump. I will provide Mickey with some practical videos of how to set it up, so you guys can actually check those videos. That will help. That's very practical. And then make sure in WhatsApp, and similarly you can do this in Slack as well. In Slack you can go to settings, and there you can also, in settings in the home view, you can set unread. And normally it is off for whatever reason. But what happens is that you have in Slack, like at the top left, but normally you have threads and things like that. You just have like one section unreads, and those are all the chats that you can see in Slack, and you can just press escape and go over them. Okay? Small quick wins. Those help to make sure that the environment is fully set in place. If there's any questions in relation to those systems or setting things up or things like that, otherwise you move to sleep.
For the home screen, you just mean the first page of your phone, right?
Yeah, correct. Yeah. Yeah. And the same you can do for the laptop, by the way, as well. So it's something that 2 weeks ago was in Mickey's home, just setting up, making sure that everything is in check, so you can do the same for the laptop. And they have, for example, an app called Raycast, which you can use on MacBook and on Windows, which allows you to search things, because otherwise, of course, if you do not have the apps, then it's more difficult to find them. So that will help with actually getting to the app. And the same you can do on the iPhone as well, is that you, for example, have the search at the bottom, so you can search the things. Yeah? Nice. Once we have that set in place, like those quick wins. A second thing is sleep. And sleep is huge, something that a lot of people definitely underestimate. But if you imagine for yourself, like if you had one bad night of sleep, like how big of an impact that has. And that was actually the problem that I was having at that time for myself as well, without knowing it. Because as you mentioned, we are just like the fish in the pond. We do not know like how it can feel to actually feel much better. And for a lot of people, like sleep is just they like close their eyes, then they wake up, and then that's it in relation to sleep. But it's actually much more than that, because if we close our eyes, We have different forms of sleep stages. Like the people with the hour ring, of course, can see the differences there. And what you can do is you can optimize those stages so you can sleep more in less time. And that is huge, because if you just literally sleep, let's say 7 hours, 8 hours, and in those 7 or 8 hours, you have 4 hours of deep quality sleep, so meaning deep sleep and REM sleep, it's much different as that you sleep like, for example, 6 hours, and in those 6 hours, you only have 1 hour of total quality sleep. So if you wake up and you do not feel energized, or you feel unmotivated, or things like that, that's the full point. Like, it's not the discipline, it's just that there are unconscious habits that are potentially preventing you to actually get that energy and focus. So what are the things that are preventing you? Before I dive in the graph that I showed in a second, what's important to notice, like if you check back, and as with most of the things, is that 200 years ago, this is actually how it was. So this is day, this is night. Throughout the day, we have the light, we have some form of activity, we move, we eat throughout the day. That's how it was like 200 years ago. Right now, for example, as you can see, like outside it is dark, but you are sitting in this like box of artificial light. So right now it's much more like this. So throughout the day we have less light. In the night we go to the toilet, for example. If you are not aware of this, we just put down the light. And actually what happens there is that you give your body signals to be awake. And the problem with that is that what most people do not know is that this is actually your hormonal pattern on a 24-hour basis. And by understanding this, you can actually use this to super effectively plan your day. So what happens is that in the morning, normally you get a rise of cortisol, so you actually feel more awake. Then throughout the day, actually it tapers. So in the afternoon, so that's why also most of the hands, of course, went up as well, is you have a lowering of dopamine. That is normal. However, you should not need to nap and things like that. We can go more in depth if that is the case later, but no, your dopamine is lower. Then you have a second spike, which is more serotonin-based, meaning that this time is perfect for focus, for clear thinking, for deep work. It's also based on the conversations today as well. Like if you have something you want to think out of, like make the most important decisions, do it in the morning because of that. And use the afternoon much more for like social engagement. So for example, right now, the serotonin is slightly higher as it was in the morning. So things like this are much more effective right here. So that's an important thing to keep in mind, and that's actually what happens. However, if we live like this, is instead of it being like optimal, your body does actually not know anymore like when it is night and when it is day. So what happens is that your energy becomes unpredictable. So if you do not recognize this pattern for yourself, that could actually be a sign that you can be better providing the signals to your body to actually be awake and go to sleep. And the fun thing is, this is super simple, but if you do not know this principle, then it is literally impacting your ability. And that's what I meant, like a lot of people unconsciously live this way, but are not aware of it. So what are some like practical things that you can do to make sure that you optimize your circadian rhythm? And the fun thing is, it's super simple. The only thing I want you to remember, and actually that you can implement right this evening, that you'll notice tomorrow, is something called a 10-3-2-1 rule. What happens is this, if this is the graph, of course, that I just drawn on, is that on this graph, the very first step is that you want to determine when is your bedtime. Because a lot of people are focused on, other people here that would say like, I would love to wake up a bit earlier, potentially recognizable. Okay, check. How big is the chance that you guys have tried something like setting an alarm clock, for example, to wake up earlier, but then you notice I do not have the energy for a couple of weeks, and then lowers? I think it's super recognizable. What I used to do in the past as well is that thinking that it is like, I want to wake up in the morning earlier. However, what is much more effective is to determine like which time do I need to go to bed, and we start working backwards, providing the right signals to our body to be awake. So how we do that practically is, let's say like for most of us, like you have something called sleep chronotypes, which means like where the circadian rhythm is sitting throughout the day. So for some people, for example, it's more like this. For other people, it's more like this. However, what I did notice in my actually coaching and in the practice is this is less relevant. So determine the time what actually works best for you. So let's say like this is 11 p.m. I will get a different marker. So let's say 11 p.m. of 11 like this. What we want to do is that based on this, we want to use something called a 10-3-2-1 rule. So if this is 11 p.m., what we want to do is that 10 hours earlier, so that will be 1 p.m., we want to stop with all like caffeine, stimulants, things like that, because actually those have a huge impact throughout the day. And also, what is more, because this sounds very basic and simple, what's much more interesting, what I see with a lot of clients that are not aware that actually are sleeping worse. We can see that, of course, with the Oura Ring and with the Whoop Band, is a lot of like sneaky things actually the food industry does to make you more addicted. And one of them is add more caffeine. So, for example, if you like chocolate, which unfortunately a lot of people do, is chocolate contains a lot of like stimulants as well. So L-theobromine, for example, is a stimulant that keeps you awake. Same for caffeine as well. So make sure that you check for yourself, okay, what are the things in general that you eat? Also check for certain teas or like supplements, for example. So a lot of entrepreneurs also take like a lot of pre-workout, let's say later in the day. Those all have a huge impact on your sleep. And again, if this is altogether you're not aware, there's an impact. So to be concrete, like 10 hours before going to bed, make sure to eliminate all stimulants. 3 hours before going to bed, you want to stop working. And this is super important because this sounds very simple and basic, but this is huge on the impact on like a mental level. It could be 3 hours, 2 hours, something in those lines. But if you just work, and I used to do this in the past, as I mentioned, when drinking a lot of coffee and those things, if you work, you close your laptop and you expect to fall asleep, you are literally trying to go against physics. Because it's the same as like landing a plane. And the plane, for example, of course, a plane needs some time to land. And the same is with your biology as well. So if you think that you are able to land your plane like this, meaning you are just working the coffee and things like that, you close your laptop and you lay in bed, it's not it's normal in that case that you have the racing thoughts and the problems and things like that. So actually what is huge then is make sure that 3 hours before bed, you eliminate everything that stimulates, which could be working, but also make sure that you do not eat anymore and that you do not work out anymore. And those things are huge, especially like not eating is one of the biggest things I always see with my clients' data is what actually happens if you track your data with an Oura Ring, and this is the time throughout the night, for example. Things I see with everybody, doesn't matter if you are already implementing a lot of supplements and things like that. If you just eat before going to bed, is your heart rate will be much more like this, instead of you want it to be much more like this. And the impact of this, what is worth knowing, if you start tracking, is that the first half of the sleep is primarily deep sleep, and the second half of the sleep is much more REM sleep. So if you just eat before going to bed, you will literally limit the amount of deep sleep. And that's the exact example that you are just laying in bed for, let's say, 8 hours, but you actually sleep for 1 hour qualitatively. So if you make sure that you do not eat, that is huge as well. If you go 2 hours before bed, then you want to stop with drinking as well. And that one is huge, especially if you go a lot to the toilet. I always thought that this was some special thing that you needed to do with like supplements or things like that, but simply just not drinking before going to bed is the very best thing to make sure that you not wake up with that you need to go to pee. And then 1 hour before bed, you want to eliminate all lights. Because as we mentioned, with the normal rhythm, light is one of the most important things. Who of you guys have some form of blue light blocker? I've seen those. I know Mickey has one. Okay, nice. So for the guys that do not know, a blue light blocker, it sounds, I literally know, like for the first time when I saw it, it was in the period that I did go to the gym. And somebody in the gym, he was talking about Ben Greenfield, and I didn't know about him. It was like a popular biohacker. I was not aware of biohacking and all those specific things. But the first time that I looked him up, I saw a picture of him with like the red glasses. So at first I thought it was a bit weird, because of course in the beginning you do not know why people do that and things like that. But actually then over time I saw more people that I suppose, such as Sam Ovens, for example, and other people talking about it as well. So I decided to give it a try. And actually for me, the first week, I instantly noticed that I was much more able to better relax myself at night, because your body, as we just mentioned, makes melatonin due to the light being down. So a quick win that you can check is check those red blockers. And also small quick wins is that if you turn off the lights, you can use Philips Hue lights, for example, so you can automate it as well, so you do not have to think about it. So that is easy. Then you also have external things that now I have to go to bed. Another app that you can write down is an app called Flux, which you can use on your laptop, which actually makes your laptop screen red as well. There's nothing special about the red color, but it provides more awareness, like now is the time to go to bed as well. Another big win is that you can use those small red book lights, as you guys have seen those on Amazon, for example, which you can simply use. Those have clip-outs. You normally use those for reading on the book. But what you can do is that you can clip it everywhere. You look a bit funny with the red lights, with everything is red, especially I live in Amsterdam, so then the red light, I also have the red light therapy. That's sometimes people watching for the door. But those small red lights, those help with make sure you still have light as well. So long story short, this simple rule, the 10-3-1 rule, if you start implementing this, what actually will happen is that you start sleeping more and less time by actually having more deep and REM sleep. And because of that, you notice you wake up much more energized, which will help getting the right energy in the day. And that, long story short, will help that you're not like randomly having the energy spikes and just randomly having troughs, but having much more stable energy, and you can count much more your energy. And just imagine if for yourself, if you actually know that your energy looks much more like this, you can actually start to plan on it, which helps a lot, which you just mentioned with the focus, the deep work, and the things like that. And this is the thing that is the most important thing, is if you're not aware of this, and we are living in this pond, as we talked about with the fish, then this is the gap that you are missing out on, that other people have. And this is only the gap of the energy, but also let alone with the gap of being able to plan. So making sure that you understand your circadian rhythm is huge to get more out of it. Are there potentially any specific questions you guys have in relation to sleep or things that you have tried yourself? I do have some quick wins with supplements, by the way. Yeah.
How can you find out the perfect rhythm that you have for yourself?
The very best thing to do is if you have an Oura ring or like a Whoop band, you can actually track your lowest body temperature, which is 4 hours before your natural wake time. That's the most scientifically proven way. An easier way is that you go to the sleep chronotype quiz online. I'm not 100% a fan of it because I did see that the results of the clients were some had some benefit of it, some don't. But you can go to the sleep chronotype quiz online and check what chronotype you are. And then you have specific rhythms per chronotype.
And then is it like set usually you can still play around with it? Like if you go, for example, to bed earlier,
yeah.
It's going to change over time, or is it like you naturally already have like a certain rhythm that your body follows?
Yeah, you actually have a gene, which is called a PER3 gene. It's super nerdy, but you have a specific gene. And based on that, you do have indeed some form of chronotype. So based on that, like knowing that could help. And actually the very best way is actually to test your DNA to confirm. However, that's also something that I know with clients as well, like knowing your DNA is nice to have, but not super practical. Like what's much more practical, for example, what we got this week from Murky as well as his blood work, they can actually see the things that have an impact right now. Nice. Two quick wins as well in relation to supplements, because the things that we want to do to make sure that your body knows when to be awake, when to sleep, as I mentioned, like light is a big one. You also want to decrease your body temperature and decrease your heart rate. And the most effective supplements, because you have heard people talk about melatonin, for example, is that good? Yes or no? You have heard people talk about GABA. What I found in the past 4 years with all the clients that actually do work for all the clients are 2 simple supplements. The first one is glycine, which is an amino acid. And what glycine does, especially if you have, some people potentially sometimes notice just some form of like racing thoughts, like in night, that you just still are thinking about work, I think recognizable. What is super effective to know is, especially if you are a little bit more dopamine dominant, so if you are like goal achieving, things like that, is that what happens is that your nervous system is more active. So what glycine does, it provides more GABA in a natural way, and in simple words, that balances out your dopamine. So your nervous system becomes less sensitive for the dopamine, and that helps you lower those thoughts. So glycine, however, the problem is that when you look it up like glycine, most people will recommend like 1 gram, for example, which is 1,000 milligrams. However, actually the effective dose that we found is actually much higher. It's like 10 grams. So 10 times the recommended dose. And you can safely take that, and there's a huge impact, and you will notice that literally the same day or night when you use it. The second one is magnesium. And that's also where a lot of people make a mistake, because they hear magnesium. In the Netherlands, for example, they go to Holland and Barrett, and they say, okay, I need magnesium for my sleep. And people that are not aware of it, they actually get like some form of magnesium, which is like magnesium citrate or magnesium malate, for example, which are the most common forms of magnesium. However, most people do not know is that magnesium has like more than 400 functions in our body, and that citrate and malate are much more focused on our muscles instead of our sleep. So you want to make sure if you take magnesium, is that you take magnesium L-threonate, which is the only form of magnesium that actually gets into your blood-brain barrier, which is a filter of your brain. So long story short, that helps you wind you down, and also magnesium bisglycinate as well. So, and to keep it very simple, for the people that are taking notes, is MagTech is a great brand for that. So MagTech magnesium, that works like a charm. All right? Long story short, for sleep, make sure eliminate stimulants, the lights do not work, and make sure that you do not eat or work out 3 hours before bed. That one is huge. And 2 supplements, 10 grams of glycine, and then the magnesium, the right forms. And also for the amounts, it's over 2 grams of magnesium L-threonate. That's the most important thing. All right? Any questions potentially for sleep or things you guys notice?
For example, what do you do 1 hour before sleep?
What I do, what works best, what's super interesting, because in the beginning I had a very structured routine, so it was literally I had to journal or something in those lines if I did that. Now it's literally just Netflix for 1 hour, for example, or like social, sometimes I call, but it's everything not related with activating my mind. That's the biggest thing. And then about like a half hour before bed, I lay on an acupressure mat, because you have seen that as like a mat with a small nails, which actually helps make more the oxytocin as well. And then I listen to Stoic quotes. That's my life hack for getting to rest. It helps a lot. All right? All right. Also, before we move on to diet, by the way, because this is evening focus, this is definitely the biggest impact, but you actually want to do the opposite in the morning. So you want to actually increase your heart rate and increase your body temperature. So small things you can do there. For example, what I do myself is kettlebell swings. It's huge. Full body, just 30 swings. Wim Hof breathing. Does you guys have, who knows Wim Hof breathing? I think most guys, nice. So a very heavy form of actually like aware, like hyperventilation. That helps a lot with like increasing the heart rate. You can also use like, as you mentioned, especially right now, like if it is dark, I have those light therapy glasses, which are interesting as well. Which are like literally glasses that shine like blue light in the eyes. Super interesting. You look a bit funny if you do it, but it's great for actually waking up with the light as well. And very standard, but like a cold shower, if you can bear it, especially in the beginning, it takes some time to build up. But after that, you do not want different. So that's a big win for the morning routine as well. And a move, yeah, for the 100%. So for the walking, that's used as well. Especially if you can use a weighted vest. Could be an interesting like €100 upsell, but it's that's an interesting point. All right. If we have set in place, so we have the environment, we have the sleep. Next thing is the diet, and with the diet there are a lot of interesting things. Of course, this is something that we literally got from school. Like in Dutch, the schijf van 5. You have that literally all around the country. However, what most people do not know is how the schijf van 5, or like the Dutch, like the form of, in general, like how to eat, where it actually came from. What is super interesting is that this person, George McGovern, he was in the 1970s, he was the person that was based on the US government. He was the one that actually was able to set up this guideline for food nutrition. However, what many people do not know is that the US actually had a big problem, because as I showed with all the graphs, which are later here as well, I think. No, doesn't matter too much. But all the graphs in relation to the obesity, like the cancer, like all the specific things, they did know they had to change something with the diet. The problem is that George McGovern was actually somebody that was indeed in the health board. However, he didn't have any background from any like nutritional knowledge, literally zero. The only thing that he had was some companies with other companies specifically in the grain industry. So what happens is that based on that, they literally, and there are some, it's called the Flexner report, you can look it back and things like that. There are connections made with the grain industry, so most of this way of eating is not what is actually best for humans, it is what is best for profit as well. And you literally can see that in all aspects. So what happened, of course, after that years, is that the world grain production just skyrocketed as well, and grains are seen as the most normal form of food. So think about bread, pasta, those specific things. However, actually, if you start checking your data, and also if you check in general for yourself with the way of eating, is that grains, for us as humans, are far from effective for digestion. Actually, grains cause a lot of irritation in our gut lining as well. And a lot of people have an impact that they are not aware of, and it's again like the fish in the pond, because they simply do not know better. If this is your gut, in general, the goal of your gut is very simple. It's to be a filter for us, meaning we take like the right types of ingredients in our gut, and it does that with something called like the filter, which is called a mucosal lining. Normal, this lining, like this filter, has very small gaps. Those gaps are normally 4 to 7 nanometers. Again, like this is the filter allowing things in. What happens if you eat a lot of grains? And it's just for all humans, because we as humans just do not have the proper enzymes to properly convert specifically gluten in the grains. Grains have more enteronutrients, but gluten specifically. It will irritate this gut lining, and those small gaps of 4 to 7 nanometers actually become 300 to 500 nanometers. So you can imagine that like a gap like this becomes such a huge gap. And what happens is that because we eat different types of foods, is to get much more foods into our bloodstream that does not have to be there and that should not be there as well. So that activate our immune system. And these are literally things that you can see with the data as well. And I can imagine that if your immune system is activated, you have much more brain fog, no clear thinking, but because that is literally for most people every day, that is again like the fish in the pond with like the troubled water, not being able to see clear. So the very first step and a big win is make sure that you cut out our gluten. Same for lactose, by the way. Lactose has some form of similar effect. And then you will notice in 3 to 4 days, much more mental clarity as well. Are the people that are already eating like mostly gluten-free, lactose-free? Is something that you notice for yourself with the differences?
I think like my skin, my sleep, my health, like in general. But so I have a gluten intolerance also for lactose and fructose. So
Yep.
I can't eat it. Like I didn't decide to do it. But
You had to.
Since I'm doing, I think I started when I was 10 years old, and I just see benefits out of it.
Yeah, big benefit. So that's huge. Like in general for everybody, there are some people that are able to tolerate a little bit better. So it's not that you will die from it, like it's not that heavy, but we are talking about that this is the mainstream. This is actually what most people follow without them knowing it. And my goal, as I mentioned, is to make you aware of like small things that have a big impact on your energy, your focus. And imagine if you cut out all apps, so you have much more focus. You're not like reactive anymore. You are much more proactive. You sleep better. Instead of sleeping 8 hours and only getting 1 hour of quality sleep, you sleep 8 hours, get 4 quality hours of sleep. Much better mental clarity. And also if you are aware of how nutrition impacts your gut, that is huge. And again, like the point that is important to make is that how we are used to believe, and also the people in your environment will say, if you start eating like that, they actually will say, oh, but gluten was healthy, right? Because it's in the food guidelines and things like that. Just be aware that not everybody knows the system behind it. And again, look it up. Like with George McGovern, as we mentioned, the reason why he set it up, he had zero knowledge in, like literally in nutrition, only some connections in the grain industry. So that became the mainstream. Also, the main problem after that is some of you guys potentially are already much more aware of how nutrition has an impact. The second problem is if you go to the internet, for example, and you search for what is the best possible diet, like the information is so like contradicting. So what happens is literally, for example, the first video will be that vegan is the best diet because vegan does not have meat and meat causes cancer and those specific things. And then, for example, if you click the second video, then it's much more that you should not eat any plants at all. Because plants have lectins, for example, which also are enteronutrients that can also impact the gut lining. So then you can find yourself with the question, okay, what is actually the best thing to do? And if there's one answer that I saw in the past 4 years, what is actually the best diet for just everybody, is very simple. And you can just make sure you have just one question to ask. And that's something like, is this something that my great-grandmother could have eaten? Super simple, it's just one ingredient. And then this is called paleo. So you eat literally what our grandfathers ate. And the reason for that is that if you check, our time as humans on Earth is about 300,000 years. Only this like very small blip of time, which is the last 70 to 100 years, there came the food industry, there came the big food, like the big companies, etc. So our DNA is far from adapted to eating those foods. So if you ever find yourself wondering, is this something good to eat or not? Is this something that will impact my energy, my focus, something that will have an impact on my day? And again, why are we talking about this? As you mentioned that we learned from Sam Ovens, what you do every day, so also what you eat every day becomes your decisions. Your decisions become your day, become your week, your month, your life. So literally what you eat, you become. Super important to keep that in mind. So if you have ever the question, what is the best to eat? Just think back, is this something that my over-grandfather was able to eat? And also keep in mind that if this is like the 80%, you do not have to be like a robot to eat super clean, but just know that if you literally touch or smell or taste one of the foods they make, the only thing they want is to make you addicted. Keep that in mind. Very important in relation to nutrition. Also, last point to make the point clear. Also, if you're like a little bit in the gray zone, so potentially you're already aware. So, for example, for me, 3 years back, I was in the fitness game, so focus on fitness. Then, of course, you have the big bowl of what's called in English like a cottage cheese, like pork in Dutch, with a lot of egg white protein, for example, at the end of the day. Those reps, thinking that you are healthy, and then the interesting thing is that you are relatively like in a period of close-mindedness because you think, oh, I'm already super healthy. But actually, if you check like what is an inner rep, and this is just like a random rep, but go to your supermarket, check the reps. What you will see is that in those reps is, and I see this is not the right image, but normally you can see the ingredients below it. What you will see in those ingredients is a lot of things you can or not call by name because they are very like technical name that you have never seen in nature, or they are very actually, that is a problem if I step on the, I think that's it. Is that there are a lot of seed oils, for example, in it. So all those foods are made to be shelf stable. And again, that's one of the examples is the things that they do. They have literally 67 names for sugar alone. So they have dextrose, they have syrups, all those different things are literally just sugar. Again, those are made to make you addicted. They use seed oils to make it shelf stable and also to just literally fill the food. However, the problem with seed oils is that they sound healthy. So for example, canola oil, which sounds something that our grandfathers could have eaten. However, the problem with those oils is that those are very like compressed, like not nature-based. They oxidize our cells, and that causes for more inflammation in our cells, which are literally just all the time a form of inflammation. If you have any form of brain fog, unclear thinking, those are the big wins. So long story short, with nutrition, make sure that you eat what your grandfathers ate, and you will be safe there as well. Okay? Any questions potentially in relation to, because like food is a super big rabbit hole, but is there any question or potentially things you guys have? Great question. For the water, the best thing is if you filter water, that you have a reverse osmosis filter. So at home I have a reverse osmosis filter. That's the best. And do not, there's also, by the way, a lot of things in the health space that are not, that a lot of people sell, but like their rendement is very low. So think about everything related to omega-3 fatty acids, for example. It's very much multi-level marketing. That is a thing that, of course, it does have an impact, but like they will sell like it's life-changing. It's like this. Same with like Kangen water, for example, which is not like multi-level marketing. So be aware of those. And again, it's not bad, but it's super small in the impact. Yeah, actually they did not, and that's an interesting thing. Yeah. So bread was more for the Romanian time. It was quote unquote. It was something that was very cheap for the masses, and they did not die from it. So that's why they gave it a lot of masses, and that's why it stayed as well there.
What about carbs in general? Like when you start your morning, or?
It's a very great question because carbs have actually one of the biggest impact on energy and focus. And this is one of the things that most people are not aware of, but understanding the carbs is huge. Because if this is your bloodstream, for example, is at this moment right now, there's like one super small teaspoon in our full body, the amount of carbs, meaning the very, very low, but very small. What happens if we eat the wrong form of carbs? So let's say that we wake up and we are in a healthy mindset, so for example, so we eat a bowl with oats and with berries, and that's it. What actually happens is that those carbs get into our bloodstream, and if it's a lot amount of carbs, is that you get a spike, and there your body actually start adjusting for that. So here's where your body makes insulin, and then the main problem is, to make it simple, it drops, and at the drop you have the brain fog, you can't think clearly, and things like that. So eating the right amount of carbs is huge. Now how you do that, like a very practical rule, is you want at minimum 2 grams of carbs per kilogram of body weight, at minimum, and on the days that you work out, you want about 50 to 100 grams higher. That's the sweet spot. Because you can also go keto, so that means that you do not eat any carbs at all. That is possible for like a short time period, but actually what happens in the long term is that will wreck your hormones. Because keto, like carbs are, to make it like non-scientific, is a form of like abundance for your body. So if you eat carbs, your body actually relaxes. So it can be a hack short term to cut out all carbs because you will have more focus, you will have more cortisol, but you are actually living on a higher stress and then you get the energy from there. And then long term, you wreck your hormones and things like that. So you always have to have some form of carbs. And then quick win is the types of carbs. There are carbs that spike your blood sugar like this, Let's say like white rice, for example. And this has, for no reason, a very difficult name. It's called a glycemic index, like how fast the carbs spike your blood sugar. But you also have, like, let's see, this is a sweet potato, which has a slightly lower glycemic index. So what you can check actually is the amount of carbs that you eat. Has it a low glycemic index? And then in general, the lower the better. There's a little bit more complexity there, but in general, that's the case. Hacks that you can implement here is make sure that you do not eat carbs alone. That's the biggest hack that I can give. And never drink carbs. So for example, those juices, those seem very healthy. Like the orange juice, for example, there's literally the opposite. Like, from my perspective, like orange juice is as worse as like let's say cola or similar things like that, because just pure carbs without any form of fiber that will just spike your blood sugar, and then you have all the negative side effects of that. And also for the awareness, like over time your body becomes less sensitive to insulin, and then your blood sugar rises, so your overall blood sugar is higher, and then you will feel like worse all the time. So that's super important to keep as stable as possible. And this is literally